The train station was barely alive at this hour, just a scattering of late-night commuters waiting for the last few trains before the city shut down for the night. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and stale coffee, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. At the far end of the platform, sitting on a rusted bench beneath a buzzing street lamp, was Jack Callahan. His army-issued jacket was frayed at the edges, his boots scuffed beyond repair, and his face was worn with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from a lack of sleep, but from a life that had taken more than it had given. A homeless veteran, just another forgotten soul in a city that had long stopped caring. The train was delayed, but Jack didn't seem to mind. He simply sat there, staring at the empty tracks, rubbing his hands together for warmth, as the cold wind howled through the station. He was used to being ignored. "Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel, as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you. Now, back to the story." But tonight, someone noticed him. A group of 3 young men, street punks, loitered near the vending machines. They were loud, cocky, and itching for trouble, the kind of guys who thrived on weakness. One of them, Dante, a wiry kid with cheap gold chains and an attitude too big for his frame, nudged his friend and grinned. "Yo, check out this old dude," he snickered, pointing at Jack. "War hero or just another washed-up bum?" The others laughed. Luis, stockier, with a shaved head and a tattoo creeping up his neck, cracked his knuckles. "Man, these guys think they deserve handouts just 'cause they wore a uniform once." Jack heard every word, but he didn't react. He had heard worse. Dante, seeing that Jack wasn't responding, took that as an invitation. He sauntered over, his sneakers squeaking against the damp pavement. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "You waiting for someone to thank you for your service? Maybe slip you a few bucks for a hot meal?" Jack didn't move, didn't speak. Dante hated being ignored. "Yo!" he snapped, stepping closer, kicking the small cardboard coffee cup at Jack's feet, sending a few coins scattering across the ground. "I'm talking to you, old man." Jack finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, calculating, steady. Not the look of a broken man, but one who had seen worse than these kids could ever imagine. And for the briefest moment, Dante hesitated. But then Luis laughed. "Man, I don't think he can hear you. Maybe we should wake him up." Dante smirked, bending down to grab Jack's backpack, the only thing he owned. Jack's hand shot out, lightning fast, gripping Dante's wrist with a strength that shouldn't belong to a man his age. Dante's eyes widened in shock. "What the hell?" Jack squeezed just enough to make his point. His voice, when he spoke, was low, calm, deadly. "Walk away, son." The grin faded from Dante's face. His friends stopped laughing, but before anyone could react further, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "That's enough!" All heads turned. A small group of men had been standing near the ticket machines, quietly observing. 5 men, all in plain clothes, but something about them was different. They weren't just watching, they had been assessing, and now they were stepping in. Jack's grip on Dante loosened as he looked past the kid to the man who had spoken. The one at the front of the group was tall, built like a machine, with a quiet, commanding presence. His jaw was lined with stubble, his eyes calm but unshakable. His posture alone said he was someone you didn't mess with. Dante scoffed. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped forward, and as he did, the air in the train station changed. Because these weren't just random bystanders. These men were Navy SEALs, and the punks had no idea what they had just walked into. The moment Logan Carter, the lead SEAL, stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, an unspoken change that only a trained eye would notice. But Jack saw it immediately. The way these men moved, the way they positioned themselves, the way their shoulders remained relaxed yet perfectly aligned, ready for anything. They weren't just some guys stepping in to play hero. They were hunters. Dante, oblivious to the danger he had just walked into, puffed out his chest. "What's your problem, man? You want to be a hero or something?" Logan didn't answer. He just stared. And somehow, that was worse than a threat. Jack had seen that kind of calm before. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't a bluff. It was the kind of stillness that came from a man who had been in far worse situations than this one. Luis, the shaved-head thug, stepped closer, sneering. "You got no business in this, old man. We're just having a little fun." One of the other SEALs, Ramirez, let out a short, low chuckle. "You think this is fun?" His voice was laced with something dangerous, something just shy of amusement. Dante squared up, not realizing how outmatched he was. "Yeah, what's it to you?" Logan finally spoke. "It means you're making a mistake." His tone wasn't angry, wasn't aggressive. It was a fact, a warning. Jack could see it in the way Logan's hands stayed loose at his sides, in the way his stance was perfectly balanced, how his team subtly spread out without ever looking like they were doing anything at all. These men had done this before, but Dante was too stupid to see it. He laughed, trying to act tough. "You guys think you're some kind of badasses? What, ex-military or something?" Logan's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. Jack spoke up for the first time, his voice even. "Son, you might want to shut up and walk away while you still can." Dante rolled his eyes, looking back at Jack. "Oh, what? Now you're talking? A minute ago, you didn't have much to say." He kicked Jack's backpack again, sending it skidding across the dirty concrete floor. That was it. The shift was almost imperceptible, but Jack saw it, the way Logan's posture changed ever so slightly, the way his team became even more focused. Logan sighed, shaking his head. "I gave you a chance." And then he moved. 1 second Dante was standing there, still talking, and the next, his entire body was yanked sideways, his feet swept out from under him in one brutal motion. He hit the ground hard, gasping as his back slammed against the concrete. Luis and Ray barely had time to react before the other SEALs stepped in. Ramirez was already moving, quick, efficient. He blocked Luis's wild swing with a single step, twisting the guy's arm behind his back and forcing him down to his knees in less than 2 seconds. Brooks handled Ray with even less effort. A simple sidestep, a well-placed shove, and Ray found himself stumbling forward, landing face first onto a bench. It was over before it even started. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. These kids had no idea what had just hit them. Dante groaned on the ground, dazed and humiliated. He blinked up at Logan, trying to process what had just happened. Logan crouched down beside him, his voice calm, controlled. "You ever hear of force multiplication?" Logan asked. Dante blinked, still gasping. "Oh, what?" "It means a smaller, well-trained force can take down a bigger, untrained force with minimal effort." Logan's smirk was barely there, but it was enough. "You're looking at force multiplication in action." Dante swallowed hard. Luis and Ray were still groaning in pain, their limbs pinned by men who had taken down terrorists, warlords, and trained killers. These punks? They didn't even register as a threat. Logan stood up, towering over Dante. "Now, I'm going to say this real slow so you understand. You're going to pick up his things, you're going to apologize, and then you're going to get out of my sight." Dante's pride wanted to resist, wanted to argue, but his body already knew the answer. He nodded, fast. Logan stepped back, allowing him room to scramble to his feet. His hands were shaking as he rushed to grab Jack's backpack, the scattered coins, the photo that had fallen onto the dirty concrete. With trembling hands, Dante held it out. Sorry, man," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack took it without a word, just watching him. Luis and Ray, once cocky and loud, didn't even try to put up a fight. They were already standing, rubbing their sore joints, ready to leave before things got worse. Logan folded his arms. "Now, walk away." Dante didn't need to be told twice. He and his crew bolted, disappearing into the night, their humiliation complete. As soon as they were gone, the tension in the train station dissolved. The SEALs relaxed, shifting back into their normal postures. It was like a switch had flipped. One moment, they were calculating warriors. The next, they were just a bunch of guys waiting for a train. Jack let out a small chuckle. "You boys sure know how to make an impression." Logan smirked. "We try." Jack adjusted his bag, giving the SEALs a nod. "Appreciate it, but I could have handled them." Ramirez chuckled. "Oh, we know, but this was faster." Jack grinned, shaking his head. Then Logan gestured toward the station cafe. "You hungry?" Jack hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Wouldn't say no to a hot meal." "Come on," Logan said, leading the way. "We take care of our own." And just like that, Jack wasn't alone anymore. Because brotherhood never dies, and tonight, it had found him again. Jack followed the SEALs across the platform toward a small 24-hour cafe tucked into the side of the train station. The glow of fluorescent lights spilled out onto the cold concrete, and the scent of fresh coffee and grilled food lingered in the air. Logan led the way, moving with the natural ease of a man who had spent years commanding respect without asking for it. The rest of the SEALs walked beside him, their presence unspoken but powerful, the kind of men who didn't need to make noise to let the world know they were dangerous. Jack had been alone for years, drifting through life like a ghost, but tonight, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. He belonged. Inside the cafe, a bored-looking waitress with tired eyes barely looked up as they took a booth in the corner. The SEALs slid in casually, as if they had done this 1,000 times before, while Jack hesitated for just a second before sitting beside Logan. "Order whatever you want," Logan said, nodding toward the menu. "We got it." Jack exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "I can't let you do that, son." Ramirez, sitting across from him, smirked. "You didn't let us do anything. We're doing it." The other SEALs chuckled while Logan simply leaned back, his gaze steady. "You served, right?" Jack nodded, fingers tightening slightly around his coffee cup. "Army, Special Forces, back in the day." "Then we take care of our own," Logan said simply. Jack stared at them for a long moment, something tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with hunger. He had lived so many years in silence, in the shadows, convinced that the world had moved on without him. And yet, here were men who understood, men who saw him as he was, not as what he had become. The waitress shuffled over, pulling out her notepad. "What'll it be?" Logan ordered first, something simple, steak and eggs, black coffee. The others followed suit, ordering like men who had spent years on deployments, used to eating whatever was available. Jack hesitated, but Logan gave him a small nod. "Get something real, not just coffee." For the first time in a long time, Jack ordered a full meal. The food came quickly, hot plates placed in front of them, steam rising into the air. Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something fresh, something more than scraps or whatever he could afford. They ate in silence at first, the quiet, comfortable. The kind of silence that only comes when men who have been through hell sit together and don't need to fill the air with words. Finally, Brooks, one of the younger SEALs, leaned forward. "So what happened?" Jack paused, fork halfway to his mouth. Brooks shrugged. "How does a guy like you end up alone?" The words weren't cruel, they weren't judgmental, they were just honest. Jack sighed, setting his fork down. "I got back stateside, and nothing made sense anymore," he admitted, his voice quieter than before. "Tried to find work, but the world keeps moving whether you're ready for it or not. The VA helped some, but the red tape gets thicker every year." He exhaled. "A few bad breaks, a couple of wrong turns, and one day you wake up and realize you got nowhere left to be." The SEALs didn't pity him. They understood. "Hello, Mr. Pictures here, and before we continue with the story, please subscribe to the channel, as it would allow me to continue with these stories. Thank you." Now back to the story. They had seen it happen too many times. Ramirez nodded. "You didn't do anything wrong, man. The system just doesn't work for guys like us." Jack huffed a quiet laugh. "Yeah, I figured that out a long time ago." Logan, who had been silent, finally spoke. "You're not alone, you know." Jack looked up. Logan's gaze was steady. "You ever need a hand, a place to land, you call me." He reached into his pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "That's my number. We've got guys all over the country. If you need work, a place to stay, someone to watch your back, you call." Jack stared at the number, the reality of what was being offered settling in his chest like a weight, a way out, a way back. The idea of not having to wake up on another cold bench, of not having to fight for scraps or be invisible, was almost too much to process. "You don't even know me," Jack muttered. Logan smiled just slightly. "I know enough." Jack swallowed hard, then slipped the paper into his pocket. The conversation shifted, turning lighter, the SEALs swapping old stories, laughing over things only men like them would understand. Jack listened, chuckling at a few moments, letting himself sink into the familiarity of it, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man forgotten. He felt like he was home. Outside, The night stretched on, the world continuing as it always did. But inside that small cafe, something had changed, because brotherhood never dies, and tonight, it had found Jack again. Jack Callahan sat back in the booth, his stomach full for the first time in longer than he cared to admit. The warmth of the diner, the quiet hum of conversation, the smell of fresh coffee, it all felt so familiar, yet so distant. Like a life he used to live, but had somehow drifted away from. He wasn't used to people sticking around, wasn't used to anyone offering a hand without expecting something in return. But these guys, these Navy SEALs sitting across from him, laughing over old war stories and sipping coffee like they had all the time in the world, they weren't looking at him like he was less than them. They were looking at him like he was one of them. Logan Carter took a slow sip from his coffee before setting it down and glancing at Jack. "So what's next?" Jack exhaled, leaning forward, rubbing his hands together. "Hell, I don't know," he admitted. "I wake up, I get through the day. That's about it." Ramirez smirked. "Well, that's gonna change." Jack huffed a small laugh. "That's so?" Brooks, the younger SEAL, nodded. "Yeah, 'cause you're gonna come with us." Jack blinked. "Come with you where?" Logan tilted his head. "Depends. You want work?" Jack frowned, confused. "What kind of work?" Logan leaned in slightly, his voice even, measured. "Security, contracting, maybe training recruits if you're up for it." He shrugged. "We got connections. We can get you on your feet." Jack stared at them, something in his chest tightening. This wasn't just a free meal and a pity conversation. These men were serious. "You don't have to decide tonight," Logan said. "But you're not alone, Jack. We don't leave our own behind." Jack had spent years drifting, years watching the world move without him. And now, for the first time in a long time, someone was giving him a choice. A real choice. Not just between surviving and giving up, but between staying lost or stepping back into something bigger than himself. He reached into his pocket, feeling the weight of the paper Logan had given him. The number was scribbled in dark ink, the letters bold and clear. A lifeline. He could take it. He could step back into the world, not as some forgotten soldier, but as Jack Callahan, the man he used to be. Or he could walk out of this diner, disappear back into the city, back into the cold, back into the nothingness. He looked up at Logan. The SEAL didn't push, didn't demand an answer. He just waited. Jack exhaled, slow and steady. "All right," he said, voice rough but steady. "I'm in." The SEALs nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world, like they had already known what his answer would be. Ramirez smirked. "Knew you'd come around." Brooks grinned. "Gonna have to get you cleaned up, though. You look like hell." Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, let's see if you pretty boys can keep up with an old warhorse like me." Logan lifted his coffee mug in a small toast. "To new beginnings." Jack met his gaze, then lifted his own cup. "To not being alone." They clinked their mugs together, and just like that, the deal was sealed. The cold outside still bit at the air. The city still hummed with its usual indifference. But inside that little train station cafe, something had changed. Jack had spent years believing he had nothing left. But tonight, he had found something he had lost a long time ago. A purpose, a brotherhood, a way forward. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. The end.